Hello, my name is Michael Smith. Today we're going to produce a simple crack texture using the Voronoi built-in procedural texture. This, I think, is a better method, at least for a lot of things I like cracks in, than the noise-based texture, which I did last time. And this is based on the tutorials that I have, the procedural texture basics. If you don't understand the basics of procedural textures or textures in Blender in general, I recommend you go look at those and then come back. So we're starting in Blender 3.0. All of this stuff will work in Blender 2, although some of the options are in slightly different places. You should be able to get along even if that's what you have. We're going to go to General. We're going to go up to the top to Shading. In Shading, I'm going to select the cube. I'm going to hit Delete. I'm going to go to Add, Mesh, UV Sphere. And then I'm using the middle button and Shift Middle to zoom in and then center it. Okay, I'm going to go down here. I'm going to select the default material, and then I'm going to go to the top left corner of these two windows and drag them to the left to get rid of these other windows that I don't need. So what we're going to do is use Voronoi. So we'll start with Input, Texture Coordinates. Today we're going to use Generated. If you want to know what Generated versus UV versus Object are, I have tutorials on that as well. Go look at the basics list. And from there, I'm going to add the Voronoi texture, which also is covered, an overview anyway, in the basics list. So what the Voronoi does, we're going to start with no randomness, is it starts with no randomness just with a grid of colored, done something weird. Oh, sorry, subsurface, base color, there we go. A grid, a grid of colored boxes, basically. And as we up the random, it takes those and turns them into these polygons, these irregular polygons. And so we're going to use that to create our cracks. The way we're going to do it is that under Voronoi Texture, there's a bunch of options. I won't get into all of them now. There's this distance to edge. Distance to edge is going to do exactly what it sounds like. It's going to take that same picture and show us the distance to the edge of each of these cells. Then what we're going to do, we want to isolate just the edges. So we're going to add converter color ramp. So this maps from 0 to 1, black to white, and allows you to control it. I'm just going to take the 1 and basically flatten out everything that isn't the crack. So I'm going to do that. Now, if you were doing, I don't know, some sort of tech panel or whatever, maybe this would be useful. This doesn't really look like cracks to me. But let's start there. So if you want to take this and map it as a crack, what we're going to do is go to Add. There's two ways. Add, Vector, Bump. So what Bump is going to do, we'll put the color into the height. Bump is just going to change the way that the light bounces off the object. It's not going to change the geometry of the object. So if we do that, and we'll get rid of the color, what you can see is it bounces off as though there's some sort of bump there. But if you look at the edge, it's still the flat face you had before. It hasn't actually changed the geometry. And we can adjust the strength so it's a little less overpowering. But this isn't as nice as actually displacing the mesh. So we're going to do that now. So the way we're going to do that, and displacing the mesh means actually, changing the height as we go around the sphere. We're going to go over here to the right. We're going to click Render Properties. We're going to go to Cycles under Render Engine. We're going to go to Experimental, which will enable something I'll show you in a minute. And if you have it, we're going to go to GPU Compute because it's going to be somewhat faster. The next thing we're going to do, so that we actually see the cycles render, which we don't right now, we're going to go to the top right corner and we're going to click Viewport Shading, which will use the actual render, as you can see. Then I'm going to use middle mouse button to drag this around to something where we can see a bit of light. Okay. From there, we're going to go make sure we're clicked on our object, so it's selected. We're going to go over here to Modifier Properties. This is a way to modify the geometry after the geometry is created and without modifying the underlying geometry. So take this underlying geometry, do something to it so that that's what we render, but not actually change it underneath. And we're going to add the subdivision surface. What this does is just add subdivisions. So the mesh gets finer, as you can see. If I click this up, what we're going to do is adaptive subdivision. What adaptive subdivision does is the closer, roughly, the closer the texture is to the camera, the more subdivisions we're going to apply. And the logic basically says if one subdivision doesn't fit in one pixel, there's no reason to create it, right? You're just losing that detail. So we should create more subdivisions near to the camera and less subdivisions away. So if I went like this, we shouldn't subdivide this much at all, whereas this thing right here, we should subdivide more. Okay, that hasn't done anything yet. Now we need to add the displacement. So we're going to go back to the material. We're going to go to add. We're going to go to vector. We're going to go to displacement. From the color, we're going to drop it in the height like we did before. And we're going to drop displacement into the displacement. Boom! I lied. This is just double bump mapping it. It hasn't done anything yet. So we'll fix that in a second. We're going to get rid of this bump map. And the way we fix this one is we go over here to our material tab, material properties tab, and we're going to go down to settings, and under settings, under displacement, we're going to do displacement only. And there you go. Now it's displacing. Now that's too much, so we're going to scale this way back, and then you can't really see the detail. That's because for the render pane, it's doing less work, so it doesn't, kill your computer. We're going to kill my computer a little bit, so we'll go back over to the rendering tab. We're going to go to subdivision, and the first thing we're going to do is change the viewport down to 4. So right now it's basically saying don't subdivide any more than something 8 by 8 pixels across. This is going to make that a little more fine. The second place we're going to go is the modifier properties, and we're going to update the levels view, so we'll see more in the viewport. So I'm going to get that to 4. Okay, so if you had some sort of tech panel, actually this might be nice. But this doesn't really look like cracks. These are way too straight lines. So the way we're going to fix that is we're going to manipulate the coordinate system. Again, if you're not familiar with what it means to manipulate the coordinate system, go look at my beginner tutorials and I'll explain there. So the way we're going to do it is we're going to add texture, and we're going to use the noise texture. Also, in my beginner tutorials, what this does is create a gently changing random value. So in other words, like clouds, let's say, so two values that are next to each other in the coordinate system aren't going to be completely far away from each other. It's going to go along a random gradient, so make random hills and valleys. So what we're going to do is plug this in to our nice gentle noise, and then we're going to do add color, mix RGB, and we're going to plug in the coordinate system into one, and we're going to plug the random noise into the other. Now, what's going to happen is, if we go all the way in this direction, what we get is completely just the random noise as our coordinate system, which just makes these loop-de-loops. But if we go this way, waiting for Blender to catch up, there we go. It does nothing. And if we do it a little bit, you know what? In defense of my computer, I'm going to go ahead and simplify that a bit so that it's not working overtime. You start getting little wavy patterns along the edges. In fact, to make this easier to see, I'm going to go ahead and plug it into the base color and remove the displacement for a moment so we can just play with it. So what we can do, we can play around with the roughness. We can play around with the scale. And now what we're getting are more like cracks, but without these straight lines that we had before. And you can play around with the factor, and we can play around with how much of an edge we're going to create here. And then we'll go ahead, put it back in displacement. So from that displacement modifier, and remove the color. And now, here you go. So this is a different kind of cracks. This focuses all the displacement just on the cracks with none of the change on these sort of panels, which are flat. But you can always combine textures, so you could add a little noise texture if you wanted to change this. And if you render this, there you go. A second way to create cracks on a surface using Blender. Hope you learned something. Thanks.